The women in Johnny's orbit were obsessed with him. He seemed to be like a drug. They couldn't break the addiction. He would make a point of singling one out and love bombing them nearly to make them feel $1 million, and they're just swooning at this Johnny Creswell. He loved it. You know, he was the centre of attention.
He wasn't good academically. He made up for that on horseback. He was seen as, you know, a bit of a rock star. He was almost like a magician with women. He was able to control and manipulate them as if he was playing a hand of cards. Nobody knew the secrets of his world. I'm in my jacket because it's so cold in here. I don't know how you can manage in a t-shirt.
I'm after running up from the Central Criminal Court,
right,
where I was at the Ruth Lawrence trial, and it was pretty warm in there. It's a small courtroom, so we're all stuffed in a bit, including the watchers at the back as usual.
So it's going ahead.
Yeah, it's going ahead. I mean, they got back on track this morning. Judge Tony Hunt told the jury that it will be going ahead. And he said then today they had a couple of witnesses ready to keep them occupied, or to keep going, as he put it, to keep it on track. And he said, and because things were up in the air, it was going to be a short day. So, but having said that, they still got through about, I think, 6 witnesses. And interestingly enough,
and just remind us why it was slightly derailed for a few days.
Yeah, so, well, what the jury heard was that there was a medical issue with a significant witness, and that they had to have some discussions about this and whether or not the trial would be able to proceed. So basically, as far as the defence and prosecution are served, they've been resolved and the trial is continuing.
Okay,
so
all right.
That's all we're going to hear about it for now.
Okay, so in the dock is Ruth Lawrence, with an address in Mount Nugent in County Meath. She's pleaded not guilty to murdering Anthony Keegan, who was 33, and Eoin O'Connor, who was 32, at an unknown location within the state on a date between April 22nd, 2014 and May 26th, 2014. And their bodies were recovered on May 26th on Inchicup Island on Lough Sheelin. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not far off being a cold case in a way. Where, you know, this is something that happened more than 11 years ago now. And so it's taken a while to come to court. And this was mentioned to 1 or 2 witnesses, like, you know, and, you know, there was a long time ago. We've heard some of this. So, like, today, so far, you know, from the opening trial, we kind of got this picture of, like, Eoin O'Connor was a drug dealer and he brought his friend with him to try and recover this 15 grand debt from one man, or 70,000 from another man who was Ruth Lawrence's partner, Neville van der Westhuizen, and they never came back. And their bodies then, as you said, were found on Inchicup Island. So that's the description we're getting. There was nothing more about their character. But today, what we heard, we got to hear a bit more about the victims, and it was through the words of their family. So, I mean, there was Eoin O'Connor's 2 brothers, Rory and Brian, were both taken through their statements. They were in the witness box today. And we also heard from Karen Roach, who would have been Eoin O'Connor's partner, and also Margaret Keegan, who was Anthony's sister. And spoke about both men. And we also had then 2 short statements that were read out in court from guards who took the missing persons reports made by the different members of the family.
Okay.
And it was kind of, I suppose you're getting a different viewpoint. So even though up to this point Eoin O'Connor has been described as a drug dealer, we also know then his partner was Karen Roach, and they lived in Teresa's Gardens at the time, and they'd been together for 11 and a half years. They had 2 daughters, they were aged 10 and 5 in April 2014 when they went missing. And that while Eoin O'Connor did have a car, at the time it was broken down, it was in the garage, and so he was borrowing his mother's car, which is this significant issue about the silver Focus that was found later in Mullingar. We've heard there was a lot of witnesses talking about when this car park was empty and when the silver Ford Focus was there. So they're kind of it's to show that, you know, the car was left where it was, and they're kind of going through all of this.
And where was the car found?
It was found on a kind of a viewing point, a car park at Lough, just outside Mullingar, which is a fair bit away from Ballyjames, which is where he was going to. With Anthony Keegan.
And was that car found within days of this April the 22nd date when they go missing?
It was found pretty much, I think, within a day or 2.
Right.
It was found pretty quickly. It was certainly noticed very quickly, and then there was an appeal went out I think on the media, anyone had seen this car, and immediately, there was a number of people, and we actually heard from them last week to say that they contacted the guards to say that the car is up in Lough Sheelin. So they were able to get that. But so Karen was explaining that, he'd get the bus back and forth, and his mum would lend him his car, this Ford Focus. He was asked how he was at this time in April, and he said he was kind of quiet, he was upset, didn't seem to be in the right frame of mind, and asked was she aware of what she was doing. Now, some of this is her statement. She's been led through rather than questioning from Michael O'Higgins for the prosecution. And she said, yes, she was aware of what he was doing, i.e. that he was a cannabis dealer. And then she said, it was on the Easter bank holiday, she got a text from Eoin looking for her brother's phone number, and because her brother, Anthony Roach, was living in Baileyborough at the time. Or Tony Roach, actually, as they referred to him, was living in Baileyborough. And we actually heard from him last week as well to say that Eoin O'Connor had turned up asking, did you know any black fellas down around Baileyborough or Ballyjames stuff? And he was able to kind of give him directions or where he thought he might find this person.
He was looking for the location of an individual to collect a drug debt.
Yeah, well, we didn't hear that directly from Anthony Roach, but he was just saying that Eoin O'Connor had called him on the Monday and saying he was looking for some guys, and he was just, that was his evidence, and he had that conversation with him. So he'd gone off anyway on the Monday, and had spoken to Anthony Roach, and then he'd gone on to Ballyjames stuff, and then he came home. She got a text from, he's in Blanchardstown, so he was on the way home, and he said things were okay. And then the Tuesday morning, he was up early, he walked the dog. She took the two girls to the pictures in town, and they met Eoin afterwards, and the four of them went to Smith's Toys. They were looking for toys for one of the girls, and around 4 p.m. Eoin got a phone call. He didn't seem happy and said he had to go back down the country, which he presumed was Cavan, because that's where he'd been the day before. And they were home for about 20 minutes to give one of the daughters a birthday cake, and then he left at 5:30, and she never saw him again. And that was the extent of her evidence. Very stark, I suppose.
So it was the child's birthday?
Yeah. And so young kids, whatever. So then we heard then from, not in this actual order, but I'll do it this way just to make it easier. So we heard from Rory O'Connor, who was next. And again, Michael O'Higgins led him through his statement. He was a roofer by trade.
He's Eoin O'Connor's brother?
He's Eoin O'Connor's brother. He was living at the family home in Coolock. Eoin was living with Karen. He said on the 22nd of April, on Tuesday, he was on the phone to Eoin. It was around 7:30, the usual number, and they were talking about a local football match which was ongoing. And when the game ended at about 8:30, 8:45, he rang his phone to tell him, the result. There was no answer, and he sent him a few texts to say people were looking for him, but there was no response. And he said normally he'd keep in contact with me. And you'll see this now again with Rory's statement, and also with his brother Brian, that they actually stayed in touch with each other quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a moment where they weren't concerned for him. So they go on in the statements to say that Eoin had told them where they were going, where he was going, so they knew where he was going, and they knew why he was going. So they were on the phone to him. So there wasn't a minute when they didn't start looking. So we'll hear more about that. So he knew that he knew of, this is Rory's statement that he's been led through in court, that he knew Jay Symes. Now this is the man described as being a drug dealer in Ballyjames stuff, who was buying his supply from Eoin and also from Neville van der Westhuizen, Ruth Lawrence's partner. And it is a tricky enough case to keep to keep track of in terms of who's who. So it's not coming across straightforward like when you're sitting in court. There's a lot of back and forth between different people
and a lot of names. So in other words, these two that you've just mentioned there are the two that Eoin O'Connor believed he was owed money from, and he was going up to try and get the money back from these two, and he brought with him his friend Anthony Keegan on this mission to get the drug debt back.
Yeah, and he was asked, was he aware that Eoin was under pressure for money? He said yes, because he had to pay the people over him as well.
Right.
And he said, and Eoin had told him that these people had their phones off, and so him and Anthony Keegan were gone to Cavan to try and talk to Jay Symes. They'd taken his mother's car, He was aware that they'd made contact with Sims in Woodlands in Ballyduff and told him that he'd spoken to him and that the money was going to be organised and he was going to get it the next day. And he came back to Teresa's Gardens and planned to go back the next day. And just again to show, like, you know, the closeness of the family, like, you know, he'd said that, you know, if he didn't get back in time, he'd collect his mother from work in her car. So, you know, he's organising this as well while thinking about going to collect a drug debt.
So he's gone up the day before and he has relayed to his brother that, right, he's going to get the money and I'm going back up tomorrow to collect it.
Yeah. And so we're back on the Tuesday then. So this is when the football match was going on. And when he wasn't getting a reply after the match was over, like he explained that at 2 a.m. he had driven down to Cavan in his own van. So Rory O'Connor is now in Cavan at 2 a.m. looking for his brother. There was 2 other people with him. They called to Jay Sims' house. There was no one there. He talked to a couple of people. They made inquiries as to people, like if you were arrested in the area, what station would they bring you to? So they went to Ballyborough Station to see if they could see the car, and it wasn't there. And while they were, I suppose, in that area, they themselves were stopped and searched by the Gardaí, and they were let go after an hour and a half. And he said at the time, he expressed to the Gardaí, I was worried about my brother, and he got back home at 5 a.m. the next day. And the next day they went up again to Cavan, this time in his brother Brian's Honda Accord with some other men. Again, the 2 brothers. They were directed to a house then in Oatlands, another estate away from Woodlands, where Jay Sims' son was living.
Right.
And his partner, his name was Sean. And there was a bit of back and forth. They got a couple of wrong addresses, and eventually they did at one point talk to Sean, and there was a conversation. This is according to Rory. There was a conversation with Jay on the phone. Now you'll hear from Brian's statement. It was Brian who was doing the talking on the phone. He said he's kind of gone through again that stuff that Jason said he did owe him that money. He did owe him money, but not that amount. And then there was at one point then there was an agreement that they'd meet him at McDonald's in Ballyjamestuff, but he didn't appear. And he's again in the statement, he mentions that his brother Owen had mentioned a man called Nev. And then eventually at 9:45 on the Wednesday.
Yeah.
So this is now, you had the Monday, Tuesday.
So you're 24 hours since he's gone, like since they last spoken to him.
Yeah, it's about 24 hours missing. He went to Santry Garda Station and made an official missing persons report.
Right.
So that was. So we also heard then from Margaret Keegan, but we'll come back to her. We'll stick with Brian O'Connor because it's just easier to kind of understand because he's travelled to Cavan with his brother on at least one of the occasions, and again, like, so he lives near the mother's house in Coolock, Kilbarron Avenue, as mentioned. And his last call to his brother Eoin was on Tuesday, the 22nd of April. He knew that he was selling cannabis and that Jay Symes owed him €15,000. And when he was speaking to him, he was aware that Eoin had been up the day before and that there was an issue with these guys not answering the phone, and he was going to have to go back down and knock on the door. And Jason told him that he'd call back, he'd have half the money. And at one point, he was on the phone to him. I'm not sure when. This is obviously kind of on the Wednesday. He's speaking to him on the phone, and Jay Sims is telling him that he's in Cavan town.
And it's Eoin who's relaying this to his brother. He's telling him that he has been speaking to Jay Sims.
At this stage now, this is Brian giving his statement to the guards after Eoin. Now Eoin has gone missing.
So Brian is on the phone. Yeah.
In one of the conversations with his brother, he said that everyone was all right. He was still waiting for someone to turn up with the money, and he referenced the person. He referenced Jay or a black fella called Nev, and then he texted him at 9:45 p.m. and there was a reply back. He texted him, "I'm getting worried now," and the reply back was and YEAH. And he said that was unusual. He says, because I've 20 phone messages, and that's not how he spells. Yeah, he spells it without the H, YEA. So at this stage, like, they're already worried. I mean, they haven't spoken to him in less than 2 hours, and they're already concerned for his safety. So Brian kept ringing his brother Owen's phone, and it was ringing out up until 2:30 a.m. So this is on the Wednesday. And then at lunchtime on the Wednesday, they were back again in Ballyjamestuff. They went to Jay Sims' address, couldn't get any answer. Then some people in the area kind of suggested that where his son lived in Oatlands, they went to the wrong address initially. They got a phone call to say, look, they gave him another number for the house to go to. They went there again; it was the wrong address. But then they did find him. They explained that they were looking for Jay, and this is when he had the conversation with Jay Sims, and that he said he'd come down, but they never heard from him. And Jay, he says that Jason told him that Eoin said that he'd come down to him, but he hadn't been in contact with him for weeks, and he told him that he was a liar, that that he'd already been talking to Eoin, and he knew that he owed him 15 grand. So he was picking out holes in Jay Sims, what he was telling him, saying, I haven't seen your brother, who they now believe is missing. And they kind of, they had him sort of, I suppose, bang to rights in that regards. He actually mentioned, I think there was one of the brothers had said that they actually gave him the address in Woodlands, Jay Simmons' address, saying, this is where I'm going to if anything happens to me. So that was more or less, again, they mentioned, he actually ended up speaking to this man called Nev, which we now know to be Neville.
Who spoke to him?
So this is Brian,
yes.
This is going through it. And that when he spoke to him, I think this is on the Thursday. So we're now on to kind of day 4 of the period of trial, the period of time that the trial is covering. And he said he'd meet him. It was a vague kind of, there wasn't a time or place. He said he'd meet him, but it never happened. So, I mean, that's the partner of the victim and the 2 brothers of the victim. So you're getting that kind of little bit of a picture.
And Neville is Ruth Lawrence's partner at that time.
Yeah, and you're getting that kind of picture of, I suppose, the panic or the concern that they had for their brother, as a and the fact that they were kind of in close contact with him all along, and he wasn't missing for long. He was just uncontactable. Like they knew where he last was, and then he was gone. So like there was never a moment when they weren't aware that possibly something untoward had happened to him. So there was 3 other witnesses today, and Margaret Keenan, I suppose, is the most significant one, and she was described as the sister of Anthony, and Anthony was the youngest of the boys in the family, and she was actually youngest of the family. He was the youngest of the boys. Like in 2014, when Anthony died, both their parents had passed away. Now he was actually adopted. This was mentioned in court. He was looked after by the mother from the minute he was born. This is Margaret again being led through her Garda statement by Michael O'Higgins for the prosecution. He saw them as his parents. She said he was always a bit mad. He was in and out of trouble from a young age. Possibly the adoption affected him. At the time when he was 33 at this stage, when he went missing, he was 33. He'd gotten into some very serious stuff, as it was put, in his mid-20s. He occasionally abused drugs. In the year that leading up to his murder, he was clean. He was doing the Michael McVerry course. He had a flat in Belvedere Road. And on the 22nd of April, so this is the Tuesday of the week, she rang him just after 6 p.m. on the phone. So this is when they're heading down to Cavan. And it was just a normal conversation. He apologised for not being in touch. He said he'd asked about her kids. The coverage on the phone wasn't great. And then they lost contact. And she tried to ring him back, but the phone wouldn't go through. She tried to ring him 3 or 4 times, but the phone was off, and she sent him a text. She said he'd been in great form, was coming across as normal. He didn't seem worried or scared, but he didn't say who he was with. And then the next day, she realised there was these messages on Facebook for her from Rory and Brian O'Connor, who in these messages said that Eoin was missing and Anthony had been with him. So she immediately went down to his flat in Belvedere Road, and she couldn't get in. She sent messages, there was no reply. She was constantly ringing his phone, but it seemed to be off the whole time. Then she met Rory O'Connor at Anthony's flat, and another man said had told her, who was there with Anthony. Sorry, another man who was there, Rory, had said they had gone down to collect 15,000 from Jay Sims, but they had got arrested themselves by the Gardaí. Rory told her that he had told the Gardaí in Santry everything, and he was visibly upset, telling her, as reporting his brother missing, describing a little bit about her brother. She said Anthony didn't have any money. She'd buy stuff for him rather than give it to him. She then went to Mountjoy Garda station. She made a missing persons report. She said that he would always stay in touch. He'd never not answer. And then we heard there was basically there was 2 Garda statements then, and there was one from Margaret Keegan, and that was in Mountjoy station. And that person then, they linked in with Santry Garda station. that the Ford Focus was located in Mullingar. And again, at the Sentry Garda station, there was another Garda there who took the statement on the 23rd of April, the day before that, from Rory O'Connor, to say that he called to the hatch, very upset about his brother was missing, and had told him the story about he'd called him back to tell him about the score in the soccer match, but the phone was off. He was last seen by his girlfriend at 5:30. That was Margaret Roach that we heard from. She was the first witness today. And
did he detail
that,
what he told the guards at that hatch that time about his brother going missing?
And he did, and he told them like they had gone down with Anthony Keegan in his mother's car to collect a substantial drug debt from Jay Sims at the address in Woodlands. And that his brother had told him this was the address he was travelling to if anything happened to him. So that's
so he reported that at the time at the Garda Hatch.
Yeah. So they were kind of absolutely, yeah. So and we know then from last week's we heard, if you remember, we heard stuff from people in Ballyjames, stuff about guys coming down from Dublin, knocking on doors, putting up posters, looking to see what happened to Eoin O'Connor and his friend Anthony Keegan. And they were quite concerned for him, and leaving, there was a phone number on the poster and telling people to call it if they had any information.
So Ruth Lawrence is presumably listening intently to all this evidence.
Yeah. I mean, she's there. She's there. Just she is listening to it. She's paying attention. She's usually looking up towards the witness box to kind of hear what's going on. I mean, obviously there's nothing else really what the jury are saying. I mean, there's no.
And she hasn't really been mentioned by the opening.
No, she hasn't been. And I mean, we're obviously going to be. This is earmarked for to run until the 14th of November. So there's a lot more. A lot more witnesses to come, and we do know from the opening statement that. The prosecution's contention that she fired a shot and hit one of the men that wasn't initially fatal, and that this person was then shot by Neville van der Westhuizen. And so the two men were both shot in the head, one then in the neck and one in the stomach, and that this description came from their mouths, according to the prosecution, that they had told people, while there was a lot of drink and drugs taken in a kind of in a tense atmosphere. And so presumably this is what we're going to hear from future witnesses about how there's going to be the evidence that the prosecution are going to back this up. This is what they've told the jury, that this is what their case against them. So there's going to be a lot more witnesses to come, I think.
And who's in court? Family-wise, I mean, obviously the members of the family that.
Yeah, there are. Well, I mean, there's definitely members of the O'Connor family. Presumably, there's members of the Keegan family. It's a small court. I don't know if Ruth Lawrence has family members there. I mean, certainly nobody's been called to testify in her behalf as yet. So,
and she would have been 34 at the time of this offence, alleged offence.
Yeah, she's 45 now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, it sounds like it's going to be a very intriguing and interesting trial, and we're certainly getting a sort of a snapshot into something for the moment. So look forward to the rest of the evidence. So thank you, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.